So the last several weeks, we've been talking about practice, not the games, but the practice that it's going to take for us to live out our faith, not simply as Christianity. We've said again and again that Christianity is not simply a set of beliefs. It's a way of life. It has to be practice. If Christ is going to have all of our hearts, that will include some things that we do, presumably. And we've been talking about a few of the areas of Christian practice that we want to lift up and think more about and hopefully to live out in a deeper way. We've talked about service and forgiveness and community building. We've talked about prayer and work and rest and searching the scriptures. And today we're coming to another area of our life that requires practice, and that is money and stuff. Now, don't worry, I am not going to offer this sermon from a place of need. We're not in the midst of a capital campaign of any kind. Thanks be to God. You know, Eddie was like, we should talk about money. It's like, I just need to warn people on the front end. I'm not asking you for anything today, okay? There's no budget need that we're worried about. God has provided for our church in extravagant ways, and so we're going to just set those needs off to the side. That's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is the reality that Christianity is not simply about spiritual things up here in the ether land. Christianity is about the nitty-gritty material reality of everyday life. And if Christianity is not just about spiritual reality somewhere up here in the ether world, but the reality of our material life down here, it includes the dirt, and it includes bodies, it includes birth and death and food and money and stuff. It includes all those things. Now, we tend to bracket off those things because they're uncomfortable. I just tripped over some kid outside. I think it was a staff member's child. I hope if I tripped over your kid on the way in here, I'm sorry. I'm clumsy. I have a body. That's just part of me being in the world. But maybe all these aspects of our life, we like to just kind of keep back because they're difficult to talk about. And that includes money and stuff. But we have to talk about it. And the reason why is because the Bible talks a lot about it. The Bible talks a lot about money and stuff. I just want to kind of give you a range of things. We're going to look at one passage in particular, but I just kind of wanted to give you a range of different ways in which the Bible talks about money and possessions. And they're all ones that you probably know or have heard or overheard or whatever. Money and possessions are talked about in the Bible. One of the chief ways in which they're talked about in the Bible is as gifts from God. So money and possessions are gifts from God, not achievements or accomplishments that would lead to our boasting, hey, look at us, we did this great thing, but rather everything that we have and everything that we are is a gift from God. You hear this in Genesis, you hear this in the New Testament, you hear it throughout the Psalms. This is a basic way in which the Bible thinks about these realities as gifts that we've received, not because we deserve them, but because God, who we worship, is gracious and merciful and gives good things. Allows rain to fall on the just and the unjust, all those things as a gift. And the response for us is gratitude at the things that God has given us. Another way in which the Bible talks about money and possessions is that they're received as a reward. Maybe you've heard this before, that there's this close link between a life of prosperity and health and wealth and a life of obedience. So if you do the right things in the right way at the right time, then God will bless you. That prosperity is tied to obedience. And that's in there. That's absolutely a part of what you see in the Old Testament. You can see this kind of frame of reference celebrated in the first Psalm, Psalm 1. Happy are those who plant and root their lives by living water because they're going to grow and be prosperous. But woe to you who are wicked, who are way out there, right? Long way away from the living water of God. You're going to be cursed and everything's going to be bad. You'll probably be sick and you won't have any wealth. That's in there. It's also challenged in the Bible. You think about Job being this righteous man who also has everything taken away from him, not because he did anything wrong. So the Bible both speaks about this and challenges it within it. Another way to think about money and possessions in the Bible is that everything belongs to God. And we think of things as belonging to us. We think of, I took great pride the first time I bought a car, or the first time I bought a house, or whatever. Or maybe you've done similar things. You think, you know what, I own this, and it's a really nice feeling. But from the perspective of the Bible, everything belongs to God. The only owner is God. God is the creator of the world. God owns all the stuff. That means that you and I are simply management, right? We're just management. We're not the owners of anything. We're management. We only, and management, as you well know, if you're a manager, is always accountable to the owner. And so there's a sense of accountability for the ways in which we have stewarded the things that we have, not because we own them, but because they've been given to us, but they belong to God. And so we steward the things and resources that we've been given. Another way in which the Bible talks about money and possessions is another kind of common thing that you would expect a preacher like me on a Sunday like this to talk about, and that's that money and possessions are to be shared with other people, that they're not simply to be hoarded, but rather that the Christian life, the life of faith, is one of generosity. So we receive and we give, and we give to the benefit of our neighbors. Not because they're good or bad or whatever, but because the life of faith is one of generosity, that we receive things and they flow out of us. But the Bible also knows the wisdom of the 1990s hip-hop artist Notorious B.I.G., right? That there's more money and more problems, right? That things are not all hunky-dory when you talk about money and possessions, that things can go out of whack. And the Bible talks about it in two primary ways. One is communal and one is personal. The communal dimension of the problems that can happen are this, that money and possessions can be sources of social injustice. Deuteronomy talks a lot about this, when the covenant that God gives to Moses and the people, that covenant, the Ten Commandments, all of that happened. God delivered the people of Israel out of slavery and oppression and set up a different kind of economic system, right? One in which there wouldn't be exploitation and injustice, but that the practices of money and possessions would be managed according to the practice of justice. That means that goods and resources and services would be offered not only for those who deserve it, but rather for the common good, not only of the people, our people, but also the resident aliens, etc. Just a basic way in which the Bible talks about resource. You see this in Jesus, right, where he says, if you've given it to the least of me, you've given it to me. And another way in which the Bible talks about money and possessions is that they can be self-destructive. They can be seductive and idolatrous, leading to places of self-indulgence and self-destruction. So that gives you a range of different things, different problems. The Bible knows that a lot of the problems in the world stem from how we practice our practices of money and possessions, not only in the church, but in the world around us. And the Bible knows that the way in which we practice our faith with regard to these things can mean that we're a part of the problem or part of the solution. We want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. But in order to do that, we have to consider one of the problems that can emerge for us, that a problem that emerges for my family on almost a weekly basis, even though I wouldn't want to admit that. And the problem is this. This is the problem. Does this ever happen to your family, right? You know what this is, right? Kids, y'all know what this is? This is bread. We buy bread like this all the time at our house, and every once in a while I'll go into the pantry to try to get the bread out, and you know what it is? The bread is gross. It's gross and moldy, and the reason is because we didn't consume it fast enough. And that's the problem. And it's one of the problems that is identified by one of the writers of the New Testament, a guy who was the brother of Jesus named James. Now, James is an intense dude. I'm just going to tell you at the beginning. And we're going to look at some of the things that James says about money and possessions. I just want you to know that, like, when you hear things that are hard, this is not me, this is James, okay? This is James talking, and not only to you, but to me as well, right? But this is kind of the summation of what James says. I'm going to give you like the big picture, and then we're going to look at the details, okay? So this is the big picture. You have to start giving while you're living because what you're holding is molding. You know? That's the idea. And so And so James begins to talk, and again, this is James, the brother of Jesus, and not Chris, the preacher on Sunday, okay? But this is how he begins. He writes this letter, and you might know that he's the guy that said faith without works is dead. So he really cares about the way in which we practice our faith. And he talks in the letter, this letter that he's written. He was a pastor in Jerusalem, of the church in Jerusalem, after Jesus was raised from the dead. And he writes, and in this he addresses us and people like us and people in his community. This is what he says: "Now listen, you rich people." And you're like, whoa, that's intense, right? And my immediate reaction to this is to simply say, oh, good, he's talking about people that are not like me. Other people are rich, not me. I can kind of skip over this part and go to other sections because he's talking to rich people and not people like me. The difficulty with feeling rich is that it's hard to feel rich. I remember when I got my first job, I was 15 years old. I wanted a permit. That's, I think, probably why I got the job. But I also wanted a little spending money. So I got a job. My next door neighbor owned a printing company in Jackson called Acme Printing Company. And I got a job. I swept and mopped the warehouse. They had built a new warehouse in Ridgeland. And I did some small printing jobs for them, but my big job for the summer was watering the dirt. So they had this new warehouse, and around the warehouse was just dirt, and it was the middle of the summer, but they wanted grass seed to grow, and so what it meant was I watered the dirt. There was grass seed on top of the dirt, but the whole summer, all I was doing was watering the dirt, okay? And so I would work my hours, and then on the weekends, I would drive up there, and I would water the dirt. And in the morning, I would water the west side of the building, and in the afternoon, I'd water the south end of the building. And it was something. It was a good first job. My favorite moment, of course, within the job is when I got the first paycheck, and I opened it up and took it to Deposit Guarantee to put it in my first bank account. I thought, this is great because I had $327 or something. I thought, wow, how much money. It was probably the last time and the first time and the last time I ever felt rich, right? Because I didn't have responsibilities or bills or children or diapers or any of those things yet. I just had a check for $300 some odd, and I thought it was awesome, and I felt rich. And I don't feel rich anymore, and maybe you don't either, because I make more money now, and I bet you do too, than in your first job. But the problem with feeling rich is that if you can make a lot of money, but if you don't have financial margin, then you don't feel rich. And part of the other problem is, that financial margin can cause stress on you and your family that nobody else understands, but that weighs you down and keeps you from the life that you want to live, perhaps, and the life that you would like to live of faith, where you're generous, but you can't because you just feel so stressed and pinched. Another problem is comparison, especially in Oxford, right? Because when you look around at other people and you see people and you think, man, I wish I could drive a car like that or live in a house like that or travel on a vacation like that. And Instagram is like the worst thing related to this, right? Because other people, you see their life, you're like, their life looks better than mine. They are more beautiful than me. Their children are more beautiful than me, And you get into the comparison game, and so you don't feel rich. But here's the thing that's hard to recognize, but it is important to recognize. If you zoom out on the world's population and just look at your life from a different perspective, maybe you don't feel rich, but if you look at it, the facts of the matter are most of us in this room are pretty wealthy. If you look at it by international standards, and if you have a household income of $32,500, it means you're in the top 1% of wage earners across the globe. And from that perspective, most of us in the room, if you think about it in terms of the world's population, are rich. So that when James is talking about people who are rich, it's just important to know that we're included in that category. And for James, it's not, back to James, if you look at this letter, the reason why he's so harsh is because he assumes something that is important to know. And that is that there was this Old Testament idea that if you had more things and more money, that you were more loved. But that's not what he believes at all. He believes that if you have more, it's because rich people are more responsible for the things that they have. And so he comes at them in an interesting kind of way. So this is what he says. He kind of leans into their culture, and he says this: "Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. And we think it's kind of strange language because you would think that the people that have more resources are that they have shored themselves, they have more security, right? They've got the ability to stave off weeping and wailing and things that could come, dangers that they come. But what James knew, he was smart, and he knew that if you have more money, it means that you don't worry as much as everybody else, right? No, he knew that if you have more, you worry more. The more things you have, the more you have to lose. And so he kind of writes about what they have to lose. And he also writes about the ways in which the things that they have accumulated are kind of piling up and stacking up. So he says this, your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes, and your gold and silver are corroded. And it's not just the bread and the groceries that we bring into our house that mold and rot. I also have these clothes that I got right out of college. I was working at a retail clothing shop, and they were going to be great clothes. And I thought, if I get these clothes, they're going to be clothes that I can wear, throughout my young adulthood. And then I kind of grew a little bit, But also, I go and look in the closet at some of those clothes now, and there are holes in some of the pants. And it's just like, come on, man, I'm going to have to go buy new pants, And I think about that. It's not just the pants and clothes I have in my closet. I've got so much stuff in my life. And maybe you know that feeling. You've piled up this and that and the other, and all of a sudden the things that you have, they begin to not be good for anybody else. I think particularly about technology, right? Do you guys have that drawer in your kitchen that we have in our house where it's the if you open that drawer and just close it as fast as you can because it's just all the junk is in that drawer? Do y'all have one of those? So I was looking in that drawer in our house the other day, and I found an old cell phone, and it's stupid. It just doesn't make any sense, right? Why would I put this old cell phone that I'm not going to use anymore in this drawer as if I might need it someday when I know full well that you left yours sitting on the top of your car and you crushed it, and if I just made it available to you, you could probably use the phone that I don't use anymore, right? The things that I have, I just accumulate, they sit there, and they're not really good for anybody anywhere, and they just begin to be useless. These are the kind of things that James wants us to think about and consider, and so he pushes deeper into this reality, the ways in which we hold on to things and they're no good for anybody. And he says this, and this is, it keeps getting harsher. He says, the corrosion of the stuff, even the wealth and the gold and silver that you have, it will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. And it's just like, this is too harsh. This is not a Methodist church anymore. What are we talking about? This is we're supposed to be about grace, not judgment, but but you just have to look at, from James' perspective, that those who have a lot, they have more responsibility. And so he pushes at this idea and says that the things that you've accumulated, they testify against you, and they will eat your flesh like fire, which is intense to say. But it was this idea that people in the ancient world, when they were punished violently and publicly. And so it's just standard kind of judgment of God language in which people imagine God's punishment to be similar to that. And kind of at the base level of it is this idea that the things that we have, we are accountable to God for. That God is the owner and we're the management and we're the stewards of the things that God has given. And we need to deal with those well, and we're to be held accountable for them. And so he goes on and he says, you've hoarded wealth in the last days. Kind of at the base level of this, for James, a few years after James' death, he was writing to the people of Jerusalem, and the people of Jerusalem, the wealthy Israelites and Hebrew people that were there, the Roman legion came in and surrounded the city and enslaved them and killed a lot of folks and basically kind of took away all of the wealth of Jerusalem and hoarded it off to Rome. And so this literally happened a few years later. I'm not saying that James necessarily knew that would happen, but I think he knew what happens for all of us, which is that we won't be here forever, right? And the things that we have, we're going to run out of time before we run out of stuff. I've had a couple different opportunities to help folks in my family move out of an assisted living facility into a nursing home, or maybe you've been there after somebody that you love has passed away, and you walk in their house and you think about all of the stuff that's there, and sometimes you just think, wow. And it's just a recognition and a reality that what we do with the things that we have now, they will tell a story about what we believe, and they'll be an example for those who come behind us. And so we have to be careful with the things that we have and the things that our money and our stuff and how we utilize them. Not only will we be held accountable for those things, according to James, but also they will tell a story about our lives. And we want to tell the kind of story about our lives that we would be proud of when we come to the very end, for our children and our grandchildren and those in our community to remember well the things that we've offered, that we didn't just hoard it for ourselves and piled it up until the point that it was all moldy bread, but rather that the things that we receive flow out of us so that others might be blessed, so that others might come to know and love the God we have come to know, who richly provides for us. And so James just pushes on into this, and he says, look, because he knows he's losing our attention at this point, and the wages that you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Almighty. You can see within this kind of the call back to Pharaoh and Egypt in the background, where the cries of the Israelites reached up to God and God delivered them. But this is this social injustice, economic dimension that the wealthy in that day and age were merchants and landowners, and they had a lot of employees. And so he's speaking to the reality that they were keeping resources to themselves and not treating the people that worked for them fairly and justly. And those workers had no recourse. They could not come back in any kind of way. And so James offers up that language. Part of it is, for James, he thought that people that have resources, they don't need to look for loopholes to do less with what they have, but rather that they should be looking for opportunities to do more with what they have. And he goes on, and I'm getting tired of this. I know that you guys probably are too, but I'm just working our way to the end. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. So you can see all the different dimensions that I talked about in the beginning that play themselves out. It's not just the social dimension, but also the personal dimension, that the things that you have, you live in luxury and self-indulgence. And he says that you've fatted yourselves in the day of slaughter. The idea here is that wealthy people would have fatted calves. You couldn't just go to Amazon and buy a turkey for Thanksgiving. You had to plan out in advance. And so those who have resources, of course, were the best at planning and thinking forward. And so they had the fatted calf, and the fatted calf would be there for the day of celebration. And so James is really harsh here, saying that they fattened themselves for the day of slaughter. Again, at the heart of this for James is simply this, that you got to start giving while you're living, because what you're holding is molding. Now, James might be too harsh for you. Let me give you one other letter in the New Testament to just kind of reinforce the point, but maybe in a way that can be a little easier to receive, perhaps. Check out this letter that Paul writes to Timothy, the first letter. As for those who in this present age are rich, and he's talking to most of us in the room, command them not to be haughty, arrogant and self-indulgent, or to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches. And this is just the reality that I feel in my life, that I want to trust in God. I want to trust my future to the God who richly provides. But in reality, in practice, I trust the things that I accumulate. I trust my ability to make a living more than God, who has stored up my future and who holds it securely. But rather, they're called to set their hopes on God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. They're to do good, to be rich in good works, generous and ready to share, and storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of the life that really is life. Now, I want the life that really is life, and I bet you do as well. So how are we supposed to get the life that really is life? Well, all around us is the knowledge and the wisdom of the world, which says that if you want that kind of life, you got to become rich. To which Paul says to Timothy, yes, be rich, but rich in good works, rich in generosity, rich in serving others. This is the life that really is life. So that's a couple different places in the New Testament where you can consider the practice of money and stuff. And I'm going to let you sort out kind of how you think about that for you and your family, because you know your situation much better than I do, and you know kind of where you are and what you're struggling with and what your needs are. I just want to pivot back and talk about our church, because if this is a word if it's a word to Christians, it's a word to us collectively as much as it's a word to us individually. And so I just wanted to kind of give you a sense. I didn't know, I hadn't looked at it closely recently, so I wanted to go back and look at how much money do we on an annual basis as a church give away. So basically give to other ministries, other church partners, other outreaches, other missions. And the answer on the state, national, and global level is this. We offer $252,630 to missions. So this is a mission share through the United Methodist Church. And what this means is that we join our resources together with 12.5 million United Methodists around the world in 136 countries. And we do things with our resources. You might not even know that this is part of what you give to, but this is part of what you give to hunger and health and medical care, abuse prevention, foster care, housing, education, elder care, and that just scratches the surface. One of the places where you can see it very clearly, especially in the wake of Hurricane Dorian, is in disaster relief and response. United Methodist last year gave $70 million in disaster response relief through UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief. And so it's just a recognition that we can't do a ton with the little resources that we have here, but when we join together with 12.5 million United Methodists across the world, it adds up to 70 million disaster response. And Methodists are some of the first to respond to disasters, large-scale disasters, and we're some of the last to leave. And this doesn't only benefit other people in other places. My dad was down after Katrina and watched United Methodists from across the country and around the world who came to Mississippi to help our people and our churches rebuild. I think it's something that we should celebrate and that we're a part of, whether you knew it or not. So what do we do locally? Locally, we offer $76,000 in local missions. It helps a number of things. Local, I'm describing as Oxford and Mississippi, the Bedour Center, Oxford Medical Mission, Methodist Children's Home in Jackson, camping ministry, that's Wesley Foundations, it's Camp Lake Stevens and Camp Wesley Pines, it's Interfaith Compassion Ministry here in Oxford, LOU Homes that works for affordable housing, Doors of Hope, Leapfrog, which is an after-school literacy program, and then Recovery Communities. And this is also not just gifts that we're giving, but we built this building to give it away. And so you might not know this, but I think it's important to just lift it up and name it. So we have 3 AA or NA meetings that meet in our building every single day during the week, noon and evening up in North Hall. And if you just were to total up the value that we're offering back to our community through that, Leapfrog that meets in our gym, and countless other meetings that happen through the week, we as a church are trying to turn our hearts to God, who richly provides for us, and then turn our resources out to the community so it benefits others. We're at 17% of our annual budget last year. We know that we could be better, right? We know that we have more to give. I know that as a church, we could be more precise in our giving. We could be more expansive in our generosity. But this is what I also know, and this is what I've sensed and believed since I came to be the pastor of this church. You guys don't realize the wealth and embarrassment of riches that God has provided you as a church. You don't recognize the impact that you can make for this town and for this state and for this region. And I want you to see what we could do together. And if you want to be a part of that, join the church, join missions, the missions team, and help us figure out how to receive God's gifts and then to bless the world around us so that we don't hoard up what we have, but that other people will come to see and experience the kind of hope and healing and wholeness that we know to be true and possible for those who have come to see and believe in Christ's salvation, right? We can do that. We can be that kind of church. And the first place that it begins is not materially, but it begins, I think, spiritually. I think it begins by simply saying, I trust you, O God. I trust you, Christ. My trust I place in Christ alone. And that's a daily practice for me and for you. And then the other place I think we can begin is not by doing anything, but simply by saying to Jesus, I surrender all that I am and all that I have to you. It was yours before it was mine, and I offer my heart and my life and my money and my stuff and our church to you, O Christ. Use us, have your way with us, so that your kingdom may come here on earth as it is in heaven. Let us pray. O God, save us from the lie that there is never enough. Save us from the endless what-ifs of worry. Deliver us, O Lord, into your abundance, into the riches of your provision for our lives. And then teach us to surrender everything that we have and everything that we are to you, so that your kingdom will be manifest in and through this place. Amen. Let's stand and sing.